Welcome to the Transformational Podcast, a conversation between brothers about practical ways faith is impacting our lives. We invite you to join us on this journey as we are learning to let faith transform the way we live. We are glad you are with us today and look forward to sharing our journey with you. Now let's jump in. All right, Chris, we are rolling now, and it's good to be back. It's definitely, I don't know. I mean, I look forward to this every week. I look forward to hearing from people who are listening. I don't know about you on your side, but I'll have actually, it just happened last week. It was interesting, Chris. I had somebody say, they quoted something. They said, "Hey, I heard this on a podcast," and it was actually her podcast.
That's hilarious.
And, it's neat because, the fact is, Chris, you and I talk about this a little bit before we get started, and even we pray about this, is that we don't seek to be quoted. We don't seek to hopefully, to be the main thing. What we do want to do is give people, the ability to transform the way they're living on this daily life and this through the daily process. And so we're happy. We're excited to hear how God's using this in your life, how God's, shining a light on himself through this podcast. And I know you have similar stories, obviously.
Yeah. I thought one was funny a couple of weeks ago after the one we did, more talking about men and our role in marriage. And sweet lady that, so encouraging. She said, are you ever going to talk about this in church? Because my husband doesn't listen to podcasts. And I just thought it was so funny. I was like, gotcha. So I laughed about that. But then...
Well, are you going to talk about it in church?
I told her we have a series coming up. There's a good chance we'll talk about some of it.
Awesome.
I think it'd be fun to bring you down and let's just banter on stage. The problem is we have limited time and we don't do good job with limited time. So anyway.
No. It's no joke.
Yeah. Then... Dustin Perry, he's a professional fisherman, and he was on the way to one of his tournaments. He was like, "Man, I'm going to need y'all to double up. I'm going to run out of podcast content." But I thought that was funny. But Robert, one of the things that I thought was interesting is I did have one person say something along the lines of, I'm still having a hard time wrapping my mind around this because it sounds like you and your brother have this great relationship with God, and it's something that I want, but I just don't, it's hard for me to grasp that that's available to me. I get it that y'all are there, but in my encouragement to anyone who's there is that, man, this is a process and and I go back to the illustration because I like using this illustration of riding a bike.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who ride bikes for a living, right? And I would never be able to keep pace with them. There's people who ride mountain bike trails. They race them, right?
Yeah, right.
I would not be on the same level as that. There's people, but at the same time, I'm ahead of my sons only because I've been riding longer. And so the reality is my encouragement is don't stop riding the bike.
Yeah.
Just keep riding.
About this. Yep.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this morning. Actually, I was cooling down for my run, something I realized you don't do. Unless you're being chased.
Yeah. And I don't cool down when I do run. I don't cool down. It doesn't just sweat
have to
forever.
wait till tomorrow. Yeah. But I was thinking about the idea of how God takes us from learning to walk with Him, and He's so gracious and He's so gentle, and He takes us step by step. He never takes us faster than what we're ready for, right? He doesn't take us straight to the downhill a lot of times. It's just one little bit at a time. And I was reflecting on my own life and something that there was a season of learning I had and how God, I look back and I mean, even right now, it gives me chill bumps to think about how God just a little at a time opened my eyes to something more. And then a little at a time, opened my eyes to something more. And didn't take me and be like, bam, here you go. He was just taking me one step at a time. And he didn't try to rush me through the process. And I'm grateful for that because I don't know that I would have been ready to rush through the process. So like you say, it is a process, and it is one of those trust the process. And as I always tell my son on the drums, I was like, you got to put in the work to be a good drummer.
That's right.
And that kid does. He puts in the work. But
So maybe we need to do another one on that at some point, because I feel like there's some stuff there that started popping in my head. But
Okay.
I feel like
I'm taking notes. Maybe
let's
another one
write
on
that
that.
down, because
Yep.
I have some thoughts on that. But if we do that, we're gonna totally take a left turn today, and
Yeah,
I really
right.
am
I know.
excited.
That's
I'm excited
not where we
about
were
what
planning on
we're
going.
talking about today. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're talking about today. We're going to kind of bring together the last two podcasts, men, women, and we're not a marriage podcast, and so we're hoping to bring it together in this episode today, and not move on, but to take what we've talked about and bring it into the culmination of what Jesus kind of showed us, and the elements I think that make a marriage successful, right? A marriage is
yep.
like actually turn out. And, we were joking about times when our kids have, come to us and they're like, hey, this isn't working or that's not working. And then, of course, as you and I talked about it, maybe it's not fair to share that story. So I'll share a personal story. Is that all right? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I didn't ask permission to share the embarrassing story. So maybe I'll just embarrass myself. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I like it when you embarrass yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. Exactly. It makes you feel better. Well, I think you remember the time, but I was trying to make macaroons, or whatever. They're the little cookies that are made out of basically powdered sugar and egg whites, and they are just really hard to make. I mean, every time you make them, you make, no kidding, 24 shoes is what it's called, and it only makes 12 cookies, and it takes easily 4 hours to pull this together. And so it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And every time I
Ooh.
do it, I think it's not worth it. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But one year I set out again to do them. And most of the time they work out pretty good. But this time they weren't turning out, Chris. I would mix the batter and put the eggs white in, and I'd do the whipping thing and get it peaked. I'd fold in the what I thought was powdered sugar, keyword what I thought was powdered sugar, and I would go bake them, and then they wouldn't rise, they wouldn't make the shoe, and I'm like, what is going on? And so I did this, Chris, I did this 3 times, and so 3 sets of 24, right? So
Yeah.
probably should have in hours spent on this, and so I said,
Now,
all right.
why did you keep doing it? Like, what was it that made you go, all right, I got to try again?
I thought maybe my folding technique was wrong, because
But
part of
wait a
the
minute. But why? What was the problem with them when you
well,
started?
that okay, that's the part, right? That's the part. And the best part, Chris, is how I figured it out. I go and I bring Annabelle in on it, because Annabelle has made these before, and she's our baker, man. She's just phenomenal. She's really good at baking. So I bring Annabelle in, and I'm like, Annabelle, I was like, I cannot figure this out. I do the whites, and I showed her the egg whites, and they're
Yeah.
peaking, they're
Now,
perfect.
wait a minute. Let me before you get there. The
Yeah,
reality is the reason you kept trying it was because when you would taste them, they were just awful.
yeah, no, they were
That's
disgusting.
that's what I was that's what I was getting at, is that you were like,
No,
well, I'm doing this, but they're so gross. So you
yeah,
bring her in, you showing her what's going on.
right, because they're supposed to be, to your point, they're supposed to taste kind of like a little like sugar, honestly. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, that's all it is. And
Yeah.
I was dumbfounded. I was baffled. So I'm sitting there like I am right now. I'm scratching my head going like, what is going on? Hey, Annabelle, come over. And so I showed her the egg whites, and I say, and then I grabbed the powdered sugar, and I grabbed a scoop of the powdered sugar, and she looks at me very quizzically and goes, Dad, that's flour. And I was like,
Uh,
I've been using flour the whole time, not confectioner's sugar. And that's why it didn't work out. And what's funny, Chris, is I'm celiac, and I don't get around telling everybody that. But every time I taste it, gosh, I would just feel so sick afterwards, not understanding that I was not only using the wrong ingredients, I was using the wrong element. It was making me sick. It was ridiculous. Hey,
which
you know what? Once I used the
in
powdered sugar, they tasted great. It was amazing.
See, and I love that story. And the reason I wanted you to tell that story is because I feel like so often, just in my time in ministry, and I'm not saying that I have all this figured out, but I think that God has shown me some things in my time in ministry, is that many people feel as if going, man, we've been married for a couple years or 5 years or 10 years or whatever, but it just doesn't seem as if we're getting the result that
Mm-hmm.
that we should. It doesn't seem to be working the way we should. And and when you look at it, I think God has given us some essential elements for marriage that make marriage work. And I want us to look at it in a second, but I want us to think about it like this. I love teaching my kids how to build fires and stuff. Our dad taught us when we were young, and there's three that we were taught. There were three essential elements of fire that you have to have, right?
I ask my kids every time. Hey, right? hey, kids, what are they?
heat, fuel, and oxygen, right? And actually, if you look it up, science today says there's now 4 essentials.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
What they say, it's not a fire. It's no longer, Robert, a fire triangle. It is fire tetrahedron, which is just a scientific way of saying a square. But anyway, but they'd say the 4th element is a chemical reaction. And so I think in the same way, if you take one of those away, then the fire does not work. It doesn't do what it's intended to do. And I feel like God has given us some essential elements. There's ingredients, if you will, that if you're missing one of them, it doesn't have the right taste. It doesn't have the right experience.
And it might actually make you sick.
And it actually very well might. And to kind of dig into this, we see Jesus reference this in Matthew 19. And now Matthew was one of Jesus' closest followers. He was a tax collector at the time. Jesus told him, "Come follow me." He left what he was doing, which tax collecting was it was basically you are working against your own people. They were working for the Roman government to take money from the Jewish people, and so seen as a traitor.
They'd typically skim off the top for themselves. Yeah. So not only were they working against you, they were also kind of stealing from you as well. It was not a great profession.
And I only say that because I think sometimes we should know a little bit more about who God used. He used this guy that maybe didn't have the best background, and God drew him to be his own, and then God used him to capture eyewitness account of Jesus' life. And so he tells us hope. So he tells of this story in Matthew 19, starting with verse 3, that says some Pharisees came and tried to trap Jesus with this question, or him with this question is what NLT says. But it says, should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? Now, this is what I love. The Pharisees.
Mine says, because it'll benefit to what you're about to say. Mine says, is it lawful? Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? So go ahead, because I think you're going right where I think you're going. That's a good
point, because for one, the Pharisees, you need to know about the Pharisees before I read what Jesus said. Their entire job was to interpret the scriptures and ensure the law, God's word, was properly applied and lived out. They were like the biblical police. All right, they're there to catch you if you did something wrong, right? And so they ask, should a man be allowed to divorce his wife, or is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? So they, as the ones who are supposed to be guarding the law, are asking Jesus. And so Jesus' response, his sarcasm is so thick here, because he says,
"You're right.
Haven't you read the scriptures?" Which I just love, because if you understand, it's talking to the Pharisees. Haven't you read the scriptures?
Yeah, how insulting that would have been to them, right? Because the answer for them is, of course we have. Like, what do you like? That was a really good question that made me look dumb.
They're very prideful about it. And so it says they record from the beginning that God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. And so what Jesus is doing, he goes, all right, you want to know what God intended? Let's go back to the beginning. Why does he go back to the beginning? Because God is the one who designed marriage. Marriage is not a man-made idea. We didn't make this up. All right, it was God's design. And so he said, if you want to know how it's supposed to work, then go back to the one who designed it. And so he goes back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 24 is where we see this quote. It says, this explains why man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. And I'll pause there because I feel like just in that we see a couple essentials for marriage, like God's design for marriage. And one is this: priorities, proper priorities.
Yeah.
And here's where we see it is that he leaves his father and mother. He leaves his family unit and he begins a new unit. It is
Yeah.
literally the cutting off of the old and entering into the new. Now, Adam's
So the
first
first
relation.
element, so the first element in this tetrahedron or fancy
Yeah.
square is priorities, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. You're
It's
saying that
priorities.
priorities is that first element. Okay.
Yeah. And the thing is, you got to realize that it doesn't say this, but just based on context, we know that Adam's first relationship was with God.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, long before God came, brought Eve, he and Adam had a relationship. And I say long before, I don't know. It was long before, but he and God had a relationship first.
Before Eve was
Adam,
God and
right?
Adam. Yep, got it.
Right. And then he says, then there's this new relationship, this new family relationship. The point is Jesus is priority one, and your spouse should be your priority two. And so when God gave instructions to the man and woman, he said, the man should leave his parents and form a new family. And so there's this picture of the shifting of priorities. And the word for leave is a word that means to leave behind intentionally. It actually is to neglect. All right. And here's the thing: your parents are still important. We need to honor our father and mother. But one of the things that I see so often in marriages, and it's not the man, it's not the woman, it happens to both.
Yeah.
Is this holding on to the old and not fully forming the new? And I'll share this because Julie and I talk about this. Is that even in our marriage, we got married and we were 45 minutes from my in-laws, which is awesome. They did not interfere. There was nothing they did wrong. But
yeah. I know
because she was so close to her parents, there was still a little bit of a dependence on them instead of learning to fully depend in our relationship. And it wasn't until we moved to the Woodlands, 5 hours away, till we really knew what it meant to form the new.
Yeah, and it's important right there. You said a very important word. It's that depending part, right? So
Yes.
It's the intentional leaving, and that depending part is really what they're talking about. They're not talking about a neglect. They're talking about a dependence, right? And so the dependence in that intentional departure is a dependence on each other. Now you're married, you're one, and you're depending on each other. It's male, female, it's both, right?
Yep.
And so it was when you moved a little bit further away that you were able to kind of, I want to say, fully realize that whole, I have to depend on you because I don't have any, like, you're the only one here. Now, I think that's funny because, like, for me on our side, Hillary and I, this isn't something that we necessarily had an issue with because we were early military and we moved a lot. And so for all intents and purposes, we ended up having to depend on ourselves. We weren't close enough to depend on, our family. But anyway, so yeah.
And my point's not that everybody needs to move, but my point is there's got to be a shifting of priorities that goes into what we talked about the last couple of podcasts, is that a man steps up and goes, I've got to love my wife the way Christ loved the church above all else. That becomes, after my relationship with Jesus, that becomes priority number one. And that there's nothing about my old family or the way we used to do things that will dictate how I do that. No, what's going to dictate is what does it look like to properly love my wife in a way that honors God? And then for women to respect her husband, to follow his lead and to, let your spouse be the first one you turn to.
Right, because it's fascinating. It makes me think of, a cord of 3 strands isn't easily broken, right? How do you keep warm with 2? The idea is that, you do rely on the Lord first because that's that priority. That's your first priority. But your second priority, I would ask the question, like, are you depending on your spouse to be your spiritual support? Are you depending on your spouse to be your spiritual partner? Are you depending on your spouse to be your, I don't know, your cheerleader? Or are you getting that dependence? Are you depending on someone else, specifically parents?
Yeah.
because, it is God first and we should always go to his throne and the rest. But, he did put us together because he wanted us to, like we said last podcast, walk in a partnership that brings
Yep.
glory to him in our relationship. And
Yep.
the best way to do that is to have that priority of, depending and
So,
fighting together, depending on each
so
other,
to
fighting together.
so to your point, it's very common to see one spouse who's more leaned into the relationship with Christ than the other, which can also create frustration at times. And I think we can also accidentally get those priorities out of whack. We put our relationship with each other before our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And when that happens, what can happen sometimes, if one person does that, they'll basically, more or less, if God is not your number one priority, the rest of the relationships don't work out right. And I
I like
always
this.
tell,
Yeah, go ahead.
there's this triangle, right, with God at the top, and
Yeah.
each other at the bottom of either side of the triangle. And the closer you grow to God, the closer you grow together. And if you're not both growing towards God, there will be a frustration at times in marriage. Why? Because priority matters. It is essential. God first, your relationship with Christ first. I'd hate to stay on this too much longer, but if you
I can sum it up this way. How about this? I sum it up this way because I say this all the time. When you love God most, you can love each other best. It's that
that's
simple.
right. That's good. When you
When you
love
love God
most,
most, you can love each other best.
yeah,
All right. So
that's
what's
good.
the second element?
So the second element we see in that verse is it says they leave his father, mother, and is joined to his wife. This word for joined is actually a word that I'm going to say the second element. And I'll explain how I got there in a second. Is pursuit, because the word for
Okay.
being joined in the original language was a word that created this word picture of someone following closely after someone or going after someone and catching up to someone by pursuit. That's what that word
hot
is,
pursuit.
joined.
Hot pursuit.
Yeah, is pursuit.
Yeah,
Now
he's doing
here's
a
the
hot
thing.
pursuit.
Yeah, listen. When I don't know what, I know what you did when you were dating. When we were dating, we did whatever it took, right? We were in hot pursuit, right? And a lot of us did some dumb things, right? We made the mixtapes or mix CDs, right? Right, and
Hey,
we
it's
give
still
this.
upstairs. Our kids will break out a tape, tape player. You may not know what that is. Google it for those who are younger.
Yeah.
And they play this mixtape. I don't even know how I made the thing. Anyway, go ahead.
So I think of one specific thing that I did when I was dating Julie. You and I have raised very simple. I always cared a little bit more about, what I wore and stuff like that, just because that was just my wiring. But when I met Julie, we're from East Texas, the woods a little bit. Julie's more from city type feel, so she has a little bit better sense of fashion. I can admit that. But she convinced me to buy this this fashion-y type. I don't know how to say that, but it was stylish pair of jeans at the time and a shirt that I would never have bought for myself. She was like, "Hey, let's go to the mall," and I was like, "Sure, let's go to the mall. I don't mind hanging out with her. Like I would go to the mall with her and not even complain." It was crazy the things that we would do when we were in pursuit, right? And then she was like, "Let's go look at these clothes," and it was like, men's clothes. I'm like, okay. But then she was like, "Hey, why don't you go try this shirt on? Hey, why don't you go try this on?"
It was a setup.
And when it was a setup, and I came out of the dressing room, she's like, "Ooh, I like those jeans on you." Guess what? I bought those jeans because I was in hot pursuit. If she liked them, I was going to buy them. And if you think about it, when we were dating, it was a lot easier to lay ourselves down in order to meet the needs, because we were in pursuit, and we were in pursuit of their heart. And men, we've got to continue to stay in pursuit of our wife's heart. And ladies, you've got to continue to be in pursuit of your husband's, love and the way guys do this. And we didn't hit this part when we were talking with the guys and girls, but there in Ephesians, he talks about, so for husbands, you should love your wife, and for wives, you must respect your husbands. Well, here's the thing, man, we've got to pursue her like we did, pursue her heart the way we did when we were in hot pursuit in dating.
Yeah.
That
I
shouldn't
like to
stop.
say, yeah, I like to say that one of the things that we have to be very cautious of, and I I pray this against our marriage, right? Is this idea of falling into what I call friends, like falling into the friend zone as married couples, and recognize that that's a dangerous place to be. Is to fall into that. We should be friends, but we should be hotly pursuing our significant other, whether it's our husband or wife, depending on which side of that
Right.
you're on. But is to fight the urge to fall into what I call the marriage friend zone, because that's not what God intended. He intended us
No.
to pursue each other, and
Listen,
that's like you said, going places with them and doing things with them and learning about them and understanding them, whether it's their love language or whatever it is that floats their boat. And then, like you said, I thought it was great, man. You said it's easier to lay down ourselves when we're in pursuit and laying ourselves down in that pursuit.
yep. So I'll put it this way, that I've noticed many times in marriage, the grass can seem greener on the other side of the fence. All right, you're looking at other marriages. Wish mine was more like that. Wish I had a husband more like that, a wife more like that. When in reality, you just need to water your grass. It may seem greener on the other side of the fence, but you need to water your grass. You need to put some fertilizer on it. You need to take care of the grass that you've got. And if you just do
Yeah,
that, right, it listen, and I like the grass element because I
yeah.
really work harder than most on my lawn. And people come, they're like, "Oh, you've got a really great lawn," but they don't know the time that I've put in to
Yep.
making it a great lawn. They don't know, and in reality is they may not even be willing to put the time, effort, energy, and cost
Yeah.
into making it their lawn a great lawn.
Yeah,
And I think
before
that
we
that's the
jump
thing.
in, yeah, before we jump into the next two elements, I think this is kind of a good part to when we're talking about that, putting the time in and the rest. Hillary and I, we have our small group, which is young marrieds. We've been doing it for a couple of years now, and the things that we do is what we try to do is we try to basically spend the first. I jokingly say we break our small group up into three halves. Let that one sink in. And so, like the first half is putting tools in your toolbox. The second half is getting your marriage focused on God and His mission, and the third half is making sure that your personal walk, fine tuning that personal walk. That's kind of how we look. That's how I look at it. It's how we've always gone to it. And so that whole like putting the effort in, there are marriage weekends, there are marriage studies, there are things to do. Now, I personally wouldn't encourage anybody to do this in hopes to change their spouse, because that's not going to work. Just
Yeah.
want to be very clear. It's not going to work. You do these studies to change yourself. You do these studies to refine. It's the hot pursuit part, right? Like
Right.
we did a series. It was our first series that we did. It was called Love and Respect. It's right
It's
here.
a great one.
And yeah, it's by Dr. Emerson and Sarah. I don't even know how to say the last name. But it's great because it talks a little bit about the crazy cycle that, without love, she reacts, and without respect, he reacts. And then you get in the crazy cycle. And then they go through things that you can do. I'll call it tools in the toolbox, like just basic things that you can do to be better at not reacting and showing love and how that works. Right. And so a part of it, we have, the art of marriage is one that we do. And there's a bunch of other ones that you can look at. But the point I'm trying to make is that hot pursuit. The reason why we take folks through that first part is we've got to acknowledge that um, when we get married early on, and doesn't matter how many years, we will always have something to learn. We'll always have something to work on. And hot pursuit means we're actually moving forward, right? And moving forward it looks like going and just doing a marriage weekend or doing a marriage study, but doing those studies in an effort to hone our craft and our skill, kind of the same way we did when we were dating. We're like, that didn't work, but
Mhm.
those genes, they worked, right? And
Yeah.
so it's learning that kind of stuff, right? And so
Yeah.
that's a part of the pursuit as we're moving on. So we want to go to the third element, or you got anything else?
No, that's good. I mean, I'll just say pursue your spouse.
Yeah.
It's essential. It's essential for a thriving marriage. And I would say it this way: pursue your spouse the way that they need to
Yeah.
be pursued.
That's a good point.
Um,
Yep.
and
Not the way you, not the way you. That's what you're,
right,
that's the
right.
counter, that's
That's
the
the point.
counter to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Not the way
Figure that
you want to
out.
be pursued, but how they want to be
They,
pursued. And that's a
yes,
part of the tools in the toolbox. That's a part
yeah,
of getting and doing those studies, is to
right,
learn not just how you do, but how they do.
yeah.
What's number
Um,
3, buddy?
Number 3 would be partnership. You see this in the second part of verse 24, where he says, the two are united into one. The two become one flesh, a one that Jesus said by design would not come undone. And the problem is, and we talked about this in the first one, is that we don't see we treat marriage like paper plates and not like solid plates. Which, by the way,
I
my
know.
wife was like rolling her eyes big time. She's like, "You and your brother about these real plates." Anyway,
You
so
remember what she said? You remember what she said? She
no,
said,
what'd she
and
say?
let me pull it up because it was pretty funny. She said, listening to this episode, and oh my gosh, y'all are so extra, whatever that means.
Yeah. So, but
Oh,
the point is that we see it the wrong way. Too often we see marriage as a contract, and if you
yep.
think about a contract by design is based on mutual distrust. It's
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
in as far as you're in. You sign a
Mm-hmm.
contract, say when you sign a lease for an apartment that says I get to stay as long as I pay, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
defines what the landlord's responsibility is and what your responsibility is. And as long as they do their part and you do their part, the contract is good. But the minute someone doesn't do their part, then the contract is void. And that's the way we approach marriage today, but because it's built on mutual distrust. Whereas
Yeah.
marriage was not meant to be a contract, it was meant to be a covenant, which is a much greater commitment. And a covenant, the difference is that it is based on mutual surrender, mutual laying down one's
Yeah.
rights
Yeah.
and not limiting one's responsibilities. If you think about a contract, it says here's my responsibilities and nothing more. It's limiting your responsibilities. A
Yeah.
covenant it says, man, I'm laying down my rights, and there is no limit to my responsibility.
Yeah. There
And
is no
by
halfway. We
right,
talked about
by
that last
God's
week.
yeah, by God's design, a covenant was only to be broken through death. It's why we say at weddings, we didn't make this up, right? Till death
Yeah.
do us part. Because by God's design, it was supposed to be the one that did not come undone, right?
Yeah.
But we have to change the way we see that and how we do that. Back to Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Right?
Yep.
Not your covenant is not for your good. It's meant to be a representation of the way that God loves us. It's supposed to
Yeah.
reflect that.
People
And
are
there's
supposed to
not
be able to see us and say there's something different there in the way that they interact with each other, and then
right.
be able to see God in that.
Yeah. In fact, Ephesians 5:31, it references Genesis 2 as well. And we didn't get to
Yeah.
this part when we were talking about it, but it says a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Once again, it seems like this is a big deal. Everybody's quoting it in the New Testament, right? But then he says, this is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. And I love that picture because what he's saying is that there is nothing that you could ever do to make God love you less. If you have a relationship with Jesus Christ and you've entered into that relationship with him, there's nothing that you could do that would cause him to love you less, to break your relationship once and for all. You are in like Flynn, right? And he's saying the way you love your spouse, there should be nothing that they could ever do that causes you to choose to love them less. And so it's understanding this idea of this. It's really a permanent partnership, that it
Yeah.
was meant to be one forever. Why? To be a public display
Yeah.
of the way that Jesus loves his church.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing you can do to make God love you any less.
Yeah. So
So. Let's move on to number
I'm going to keep
4.
rolling. 4 is in
Yeah,
verse
let's do it.
25, which nobody else quotes, but it's still there and it's still part of what he's saying in the original design. It says, now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. And I know sometimes some may be thinking, all right, now we're getting somewhere. But the
Yeah,
fourth
right? 'Cause
essential.
now we're naked.
Yeah. But the
Now it's a
fourth
party.
essential.
Now it's a
Fourth
party.
essential, while that's probably good in marriage, but it isn't the essential. The essential isn't nakedness. The fourth essential, though, is purity.
Man, darn it. All
Yeah,
right. Purity.
it's purity, right? Because they were both felt naked and felt no shame, meaning they had nothing to hide. And that's a picture of intimacy. This picture of being able to know someone fully and be fully known without fear of judgment or rejection. Before sin, we had perfect intimacy with God and perfect intimacy with one another. Why? Because there was purity. There was pure of heart, pure of mind. There was nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
And so here's the way I like to say it, and I'm sure I stole this from someone years and years ago, I just don't know who, is that purity paves the way to intimacy.
Okay.
We got to choose purity. Earlier in Ephesians 5, once again, we were talking about the basis of our marriage relationship comes from living a life of that was worthy, a light and living like followers of Jesus. And he said, let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. And you know what's crazy? The word there in Ephesians 5 for immorality is the word porneia, which is where we get the pornography from.
Heard that
Robert,
one before, right?
I cannot tell you how many marriages I've met with people that are being absolutely ripped to shreds because of a pornography addiction. And the greatest lie is that it's not hurting anyone. Open your eyes. It's destroying your marriage.
It's destroying your marriage. It's destroying society. It's destroying, women. It's destroying men. It's destroying future intimacy. It's destroying current. I mean, Chris, it's so destructive. This is how you know how destructive it is. It's so destructive that even the world, people who aren't Christ followers, are starting to wake up and call it the new drug.
Yeah.
The new drug, because they're saying that this is what's actually blowing things up. And so if you're caught in that, there's a lot of chemical reaction around that. There's a lot of stuff that, like, once you start walking down that road, to walk out of that on your own, I would offer is probably going to be harder than leaving drugs, because it's quiet. There's no one to help you. There's not much to do, but there is hope.
Well,
there is
and I'll
help.
say there is people who help you, but the lie will be that there is no one to help you, and there are people to help you. Yeah,
that's a good way to say that. Thank you, because that's where I was going with that.
Yeah,
there are people who work through that. There are people who help you. There's people at my church right now, Tom and Michele Weaver. If you wanna look them up here at Faith Bible Church Mechanicsville, they meet with people all over the world to help them break the bonds of sexual sin, because they know what it means to be blown up by it, and then they know the benefit of walking in purity and leaving it behind. And so if you find yourself in that place, get help. Find somebody to walk through that with you. There's software. We have personally, we have Covenant Eyes on our devices. That's just, I think, honestly, if you're a parent, that's just smart. I didn't do that for a long time, and I think I was an idiot for not doing that. But set device rules, all that stuff. But if you find yourself trapped there, you need to get help. You need to get out of it, because I promise you, if you don't think it's going to blow up in your face, it's just a matter of time at this point.
Yep. And I think the point is that purity is essential for having a meaningful marriage, period. Because ultimately, here's the thing. Ultimately, what you need more than, sex is intimacy.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true.
The thing is that, and that's what's bad about the porn industry, is it tries to make sex this purely physical thing. The reality is it's so much deeper than that. And when they devalue the way God designed sex for marriage between one couple and the other, then it actually, we devalue it and we miss out on the greatest part about it. It's the deep emotional and even spiritual connection that was intended. Well, the only way we experience the fullness of that is through purity. And I would say for men, it's pornography, and I would say for women, it's relational and emotional purity. Because I think sometimes,
it's emotional.
Just like men can trade, the physical, seeing things and whatever, or trade intimacy for those things. I think women can trade intimacy for just emotional satisfaction through other ways and through other things. And it's not seen as bad because I still don't think that our culture realizes the way it affects relationships, because they get their fix somewhere else. And so they're not getting they're not willing or interested in getting emotional needs satisfied.
I believe it can be seen in you're talking about emotional stuff in relationships with other people. I can see that even with, how, there's an interaction with social media, an interaction with, books or whatever. But if you find yourself in this need for intimacy and you go to something other than your husband to get that fix, to get that hit, much like men do when they think that they can't, satisfy their sexual urges any other way than going to pornography. Same kind of bent. Then what you're doing is you're sacrificing intimacy. You're sacrificing that ability to go back to element one, priority, which is where we, intentionally leave our parents and we depend on each other. You're sacrificing that dependence on each other for dependence on something else. And
right.
That's really where that purity comes. And that's actually where you have that no shame and you don't have anything to hide. And you actually can have the open discussions. And if you're finding like, I can't have those open discussions, then guess what? It might be time to go see somebody and have a third party like help walk you through that. Right. Because I have a Ford out back right now, Chris. It's an F-150. Yeah, it's a great one, man. That's right. 286,000 miles. All right.
Yeah, take that, Chevy.
Yeah. I have that too. It has less miles.
Chevy too. That's why I said that.
Yeah, but this one needs a new rear differential, and you can hear it roaring, and it definitely is giving all the warning signs of like, hey, I need a new rear differential. And I can do one of two things, Chris. I can continue to drive it with it roaring in the back and not do anything about it. And at some point, what's going to happen is it's going to seize up, and best case scenario, it's just going to skid to a stop. Worst case scenario, the literal wheels are going to rip off the back.
And just to be clear, this is the one you offered for me to drive around when I come visit you. So that's
it's only 3 miles. You'll be fine. But my point being is it's important to get that in the shop and get it fixed before the wheels fall off, right?
That's right.
And so if one person in your marriage that comes to the other one, you need a Mayup pack right now that says if one person comes forward and says, I think we need to go to a marriage counselor, I think we need to go have somebody have a third party here, then you need to make a commitment that you're going to do that. All right. Because that's the roaring in the back of your F-150. All right. Yeah. So if you deny it, what's going to happen is the wheels are going to fall off and a lot more damage is going to be done. That's totally unnecessary.
Yeah. So I want to just get real practical as we get towards the end here. Is one, look at your priorities. Some need to start by fully following Jesus, because if that's not the first priority in your life, the other relationships will suffer. You'll never be able to give others what they need because you're not going to the source of ultimate love. And so go to the source. And then men, many of you, your spouses and families need you to lead the way God designed you to lead, to seek God's kingdom first, and to lead your family by not just riding the wave spiritually, but saying, man, I don't know, I'm growing in this too. And it's okay to tell your family, hey, I'm going to start doing this. I don't know really what I'm doing, but I'm learning. Would love for you to learn with me. Yep, and just start somewhere and just start. And women, I would just say it's time to make the decision that you're your husbands will get priority over your kids, social media, friend groups, or even your extended family. That prioritize the relationship by date nights or weekends away, or like Robert was talking about, uh, group material that you go through together, or conferences, but prioritize it. Like, it is
Yep.
time for us to stop looking and saying our grass isn't growing. Okay, so what are
Yep.
you doing about it? Like,
Time to do something.
do something. All right.
Yep.
And then pursuit. It's time to pursue again. And so here's the thing that I like to tell people is that when you think something nice, say it. When you think about
Right.
doing something good, do it. Like,
Yeah.
just send the text, make the phone call, write the note, leave. My wife the other morning, I get up about 4:30 on Sunday mornings to get my stuff ready for our services on Sundays. And I set myself out the night before because I don't want to wake everybody up. And the
Yeah.
next morning I get up, I'd gone to bed earlier than them. And there was just a simple note on the stack of my clothes, in the bathroom, that I woke up to and walked in there to, just saying, it's going to be a great day, praying for you and love you.
Yeah.
Listen, that is simple, right?
You know what my
And
favorite one was that Hillary did?
what's that?
Since we're bragging on wives, is she had packed my lunch one day, and inside of it, and she doesn't pack my lunch every day, so don't think that happens, because typically I wake up earlier, so it's hard for her to do that. But anyway, that day it happened, but that's not the point. What was awesome is when I opened the lunch, there was a little bitty note card. It's about, yay big, big as my palm, right? And it said, nice buns. It was like hamburger. It says, nice buns. And on the inside, it said, I love you, Hillary. That joker is sitting on my desk at work. I love to see that every day I work it. It's been on my desk for almost 3 or 4 years now, Chris,
Yeah.
because that's how much it meant to me when I saw it.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be big. It's just the meaningful, intentional stuff that matters. And so I
Absolutely.
love this stuff. The third, you need to choose to see your partnership the way God does. That you say, man, I'm going to honor God by doing my part, no matter whether I'm laying down my rights. There is no limit to my responsibilities. That my goal is not to get out of the marriage. My goal is that my marriage will glorify God regardless of what my spouse does. That the way I love them, the way I serve them, and that ultimately, even if people look and go, man, can you believe how much he loves his wife? Man, she doesn't seem
Yeah.
to do as much for him, but man, do you see the way? Why does he do that? Well, because of Jesus. That's why. Because that's the way
Mm-hmm.
Jesus loves us. And so, and I'm not saying that about my own marriage. I'm saying that it shouldn't be about what the other person's doing. It's about us saying, God, even if they don't, I will.
Yep.
I will honor you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is simply this:
Absolutely.
pursue purity. And for some, that means you need to set some personal boundaries in your life. So, very practical example: when I was in college, got to college, this was back when there wasn't Wi-Fi. You had Ethernet.
Yep.
And actually, we just had dial up at home. And so we got to college and had Ethernet in the dorms, and man, access to things that I did not need access to. So I got rid of my Ethernet cable, my network cable in
Okay.
my dorm,
Okay.
and had to go to the computer lab to turn stuff in. So I do the work on my computer, I put it on a disk or a thumb drive, and I would go to the computer lab to turn stuff in and to do the things I need to do. Why? Because I looked and realized uh, the seriousness, because there was some things that got in my life of pornography and the way it destroyed people. And I said, man, I don't want to give the enemy a foothold to have that kind of destruction in my life, or that kind of. And so I got rid of it. And does that seem ridiculous? Yeah, to some it might,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like I've heard it said, it's like guardrails. Guardrails isn't set up on the brink of danger. Guardrails is
Yeah.
set up several feet away from danger, so that if you
Right.
hit the guardrail, you're still safe, right?
Yeah.
You're not
Yeah.
dying because you hit the guardrail. And I think we've got to learn to stop saying, how close to the line can I get? Because if you think
Mm-hmm.
about it, what is the line? The line is sin. So as long as
Yep.
you're getting as close to sin as you can get, you're still going away from
Yeah.
Jesus.
Chris, I
If you
delete. Yeah, I delete apps if I feel like they tempt me to do, look at stuff that I shouldn't be looking at. So
yeah.
like For me, I'm like, okay, well, I don't like what that did to my head. I don't like what it did to my heart. I'm
Yeah.
just going to delete it. Like, I don't need it. And
Yeah.
so, so it is important to just pay attention to your triggers and then start taking
Yeah.
action. And if you need help, I'll put it in our show notes just to help people who need actual, like, tangible people to talk to.
Yeah.
Because I know our ministry here, and if you have a ministry at your church, I can put one in the show notes as well. But we have a couple who specializes in helping people get out of pornography, get out of the addiction,
Yeah.
get out of those chains, to shed that behind them and leave it behind and start a new
Yeah.
life of purity.
So one other example, just once again, I'm not bragging. I'm just trying to give you practical steps. When I traveled with the ministry, quite often, um, early on, I'd go to these towns and get a hotel room, and I would go in and I'd unplug the TV because I heard of actually Billy Graham doing that.
Yeah,
For
he
one,
would
he'd
put
never
a
traveled
towel over it,
alone,
even.
right?
Yeah,
And I just decided, why? Because there was stuff that I had access to on there that I didn't have access to at home, but because where I was, I did. And I was like, no, I'm going to make it incredibly difficult to put myself in that place. And so the first thing I would do, walk in, set my stuff down, turn on the air, and unplug the TV, because I was like, well, I don't want to put myself in that place. And so make pursue purity, whatever that looks like, and just know that God will honor that. And
yeah,
your your spouse will feel valued. Your spouse will feel cherished,
yeah,
because, as I like to say, I only have eyes for my wife.
yeah. Well, Chris, we're gonna wrap it here. I'll give you one last chance for a final thought, but before we do that, I just want folks to know we'll have a lot of stuff in the show notes on this episode to hopefully help you pursue these principles that or these elements that Chris lined out today. Even if you need victory from pornography, we'll have that in there. Also, our website is going under a little bit of construction where I'm starting to add maybe some of my old writings and maybe some new writings. So if you're just looking for something to read, these are thoughts from some of them are I call the old stuff thoughts from like 5, 7, 10 years ago. I don't remember things that I wrote back in the day. They seem a lot smarter than I remember, but so it's there for you to enjoy, to read, hopefully connect with God, and then obviously keep talking to us about what God's doing in your life in this podcast. But Chris, we've culminated 2 podcasts into this one, and really, I think brought us to a point to where maybe we can move on in the next one. But if you had like one last note for this podcast, what would you how would you put it?
I would say this. I go back to the illustration of your macaroons. Is that, listen, if what you're getting out isn't what you expected, then you may want to go check and make sure that the proper ingredients are there. Because if you're missing one of those 4 elements that was part of God's design, the ingredients for great marriage that He gave us, chances are it's not going to be what you expected. But if you will put them in the way that God designed, I'm telling you, it's the way to make marriage meaningful, and a marriage that I believe will last a lifetime.
Amen.